Hello everyone, today I'm going to talk about the VBC Wildfire D08. Now this is the latest wildfire kit offered by VBC Racing, and it's my first time actually building a wildfire kit, so I'm just going to talk to you about my experiences building the kit and some build suggestions and tips on helping you build a VBC wildfire kit smoothly and easily. Alright, so first foremost, you have your main chassis and your upper deck. What you want to do is you want to sand the edges down. You can go ahead and apply CA glue if you want to, but generally I just leave it the way it is. Sanding will do just fine. Now with the gear differential here, I've done another video explaining about how I did the build there, so I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I will talk about the ball bearings that are running throughout the system here. Excellent job by VBC Racing. These bearings are oiled instead of greased, and so you have a nice smooth drivetrain right out of the box. You don't have to worry about degreasing them whatsoever. So good job, VBC Racing. Now when it comes to the bulkheads here and the motor mount, the machining is really well done. Really impressed with it. Now, when you are building the bulkheads, you want to make sure that they're 19 millimeters apart for the front and rear. You want to make sure that the spacing is 19 millimeters between the left and right. Now, it's going to be fairly difficult to figure all that out. What I've done is I've actually gone ahead and I've used the bearing spacer here as kind of like a tool to measure whether or not the spacing is accurate. But I'll talk about that later on, so don't worry about that until later. Now one thing is the actual spur gear assembly here, the pulley assembly. The motor mount itself has, if I can show you there, the motor mount, I know it's upside down, but in behind here there is a CNC machine slot for the actual pulley shaft to key in. You want to make sure that you set that in properly, or you'll actually accidentally mar the aluminum. So be careful with that. Just really pay attention to how the instructions tell you to assemble the pulleys with the bearings and spacers. I've gone ahead to use the Pan-Eraser spur gear because I just like the looks of the Pan-Eraser, but you can use the Kawada spur gear that comes in the kit. Works just fine. Next, I would probably move on to the steering assembly. The steering assembly is probably by far the best steering assembly that I've built so far out of the touring car kits I've had in my years. Slop-free, smooth, that's exactly what you need straight out of a kit, and VBC Racing has done that exactly, and I'm very impressed with that. Not only that, the actual mounts here, it's floating right here, so the actual mounting location is on the axis, the center axis of the chassis, which will help with the flex characteristics, which is a nice feature. So that's your steering system, top notch. You have your suspension blocks, your front and rear suspension blocks. You want to make sure that the suspension block inserts are pushed in nice and snugly. You might have to use a little bit of pressure to pop them in. But yeah, nice machining done with that. Also, you can replace these suspension blocks to add or take away toe in, toe out, or even the track width. So VBC Racing offers various inserts to change around and tune the toe in, toe out, or track width, which is nice. Now the suspension arms, this is a silver compound, which is, it's a hard compound, but it's not as hard as the gold standard, which is the hardest, the stiffest. of the suspension arm plastics. When you are building the suspension arms, you want to make sure that you take a 3mm drill or drill bit or reamer and remount the suspension arms because it's quite a tight fit. You want to do that for the inner hinge pin here and the outer hinge pin here, and that will offer a nice smooth bind-free suspension. Like I said, the plastics are really well done, built up really nicely. Now the CVDs in the rear here, you'll need to do some minor assembly. Please use thread lock on the actual pin that will connect the drive blade on right there. Now I found that the drive blade was a little bit too wide and it was causing some binding in the actual drive cup. So what I did is I took the plastic off and I just used some sandpaper and I sanded it down, and now it's operating nice and smoothly. Next, the sway bar mounts. Now I encountered a little problem here with the sway bar mounts. Now the fit and finish is really nice, but the only problem I had was the actual ball, the plastic, had a lot of up and down slop, but there was no side to side slop, which was really good, but it's just up and down. There was too much movement there. And so what I did is I put a rubber O-ring from an old shock. I put a rubber O-ring underneath here in the front, and I removed the up and down movement because you don't want to have any slop like that when you're running a setup like the anti-roll setup here. So that's one suggestion I would definitely look into doing, is putting a rubber O-ring underneath there. Also, the rubber O-ring doesn't allow the actual cup to bind. It will allow it to shift side to side, so you don't have any binding there whatsoever. So that's the anti-roll bars. The turnbuckle's built up nice and easily. The shocks, I decided when building the shocks to put a small hole here in order to allow for zero rebound. The shocks are pretty straightforward. Actually, they were probably the easiest shocks to build and very consistent from each shock when I was building each shock. Usually you have to tinker around quite a bit to get them to have zero rebound, or if you choose to do so to have rebound. I found that they were very easy to build and very consistent, and well done VBC Racing. The shocks are top notch. I would say they were a lot better than other manufacturers that I was building and previously. The anti-roll bar setup here, it's really nice with the ball bearings. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I use this ball bearing setup here to help out with the spacing of the bulkheads. When I did first mount this on here like so, I moved the actual ball bearing mount around and it was very gritty, it was binding. So obviously there was a lot of pressure being applied on the bearings, and so what I did is I flipped the chassis upside down and I loosened these 4 screws, which ultimately loosened up the actual bulkheads. But I also loosened up these screws here on the shock tower, so the bulkheads and the whole assembly can shift side to side. So after I did all that, I noticed that the actual bearings were moving smoothly. So what I did is I just left it the way it is, and then I just reset the bulkheads again in the shock tower, and everything was perfectly fine afterwards. So you can use this as a way to check to see whether or not your bulkheads are putting too much pressure on the bearing supports. Okay, and I did the same for the front. What else can I talk about here? The front end. The suspension arms, like I did with the rear, reamed them out with a 3mm reamer. Did the same with the outside pin. Building the front drive shafts, what you want to do is disassemble them and put anti-wear grease on them. This can be a bit of a hassle getting the clips off, but just really be patient getting the clips off and also getting the clips on. Just remember how the clips were oriented when you took them off. I found that if the clips were facing, like the curving of the clip was facing the wrong direction, it made it a lot harder to get them on. So my mind just turned on there and I realized, well, maybe the clips have to face, the curvature of the ring has to face inwards in order for them to clip in easily, which they did. So just keep an eye on how the clips came off and mount them back on again the way they came off. Okay. Now the only thing is with there's a little bit of slop here, which, you know, a couple of shims here will help take out the play there. But that's not a huge issue, just a couple of shims there. I really like the idea of using a set screw to hold in the cross pin. That's a really unique idea. There's lots of really cool ideas throughout the chassis that I haven't seen on previous manufacturers' chassis. The pulley, you want to make sure that the pulley, you'll have to glue the one side onto the main pulley. Make sure you do this, make sure you're careful with it. You don't want to go crazy with the glue. Just only a little bit of CA glue and that should definitely get that stuck on there. I have encountered a situation where the pulley was touching the inside of this tower here. Just a little bit of sanding will help take some material off, and that will allow the pulley to operate smoothly. That could be due to my mistakes when gluing the actual pulley together. But yeah, overall, I've been really impressed with the build and the amount of tuning features this car has. Just so many adjustments. You can change the different compound, plastic compound. If you choose to buy the optional gold, you can change that. You can change the flex characteristics with adding shims underneath here. Flex characteristics for the, changing up the screws positions. There's lots of options this kit has, and I was really blown away by the additional option parts that will help further tune the car. You can buy the optional lower profile shock towers and dampers. There's just tons of stuff. You'll have to go to VBC Racing and check it out. My previous touring car kit, had some tuning options which worked well, but VBC Racing has a ton of tuning options, and you can really tune your car to suit your driving style and also the track conditions. And I think VBC Racing has done an excellent job with designing and manufacturing this chassis kit. There's lots of aluminum, lots of carbon fiber, and VBC Racing has definitely done their homework with the D08. And I'm very impressed with it, and I'll definitely let you know how it performs on the track. Okay, bye-bye.